locked out of the transition. Governments and industries must act decisively to prevent disorderly shifts. Policy cannot remain while the world accelerates. Governments must craft frameworks that incentivize bold innovation, de-risk essential investment, and ensure commitments beyond the short term. Success will be measured, I submit, not by how fast the wealthiest decarbonize, but how inclusively the world transforms. Nobody can say with any degree of certainty what the new framework for global energy markets will look like, but we can be sure that it is going to be transforming at breakneck speed, driven by forces that are both accelerating and colliding. What we see today is a recalibration of strategy, prioritizing near-term profitability while keeping long-term transitions efforts in play. Before anyone accuses me of ignoring our environmental obligations, I must state that the primary focus remains on increasing the adoption of biofuels, renewables and hydrogen. The IEA estimated that global energy investment was going to exceed $3 trillion for the first time in 2024, with $2 trillion going to clean energy, technologies and infrastructure. Climate change is no longer a looming threat. It is already here. It is unfolding in many grave disasters. Wildfires, floods and record-breaking temperatures are clear reminders that the world is running out of time. I am a student of history. When I look back at the evolution of global energy economics, I recognize that the very notion of energy transition requires a very deep and nuanced understanding. It is not outright replacement, but more shifting the primacy of one energy source over another. This transition isn't about eliminating hydrocarbons overnight, but leveraging them strategically while scaling renewables to mitigate emissions. For too long, we have framed energy transition as a linear journey, from fossil fuels to renewables, from past to future, from problems to solution. But what if this logic is not feasible? Even when renewables become the dominant energy sources, oil and gas will continue to play an important, if not pivotal role, not just in power generation, but in stabilizing grids, industrial hydrogen and energy storage innovation. One thing has become absolutely clear to all stakeholders. Energy justice must remain at the core of the imminent transformation. A fragmented transition risks deepening inequality, leaving billions without reliable energy, while wealthier nations surge ahead. If the transition is not just, it will not succeed, because the political economy will not allow it. There are three forces, in my view, that will play a pivotal role in shaping the energy landscape in the coming years. Artificial intelligence and clean cooking are emerging as major energy demand drivers, each shaping the future of economies and societies. AI is one of the largest energy consumers, with data center demand rising 18 to 20% annually by 2030. India's AI-driven digital economy, projected to reach $400 billion by 2030, presents both a challenge and an opportunity. The real question is not how we will meet this surge in demand, but how we will do so without destabilizing grids or derailing climate commitments. Renewables alone won't be enough. AI-driven demand requires round-the-clock reliability, meaning natural gas, coal with carbon abatement, and next-generation nuclear will remain essential. But the potential benefits are immense. AI itself will enhance fossil fuel efficiency, reshaping the energy equation where intelligence, not just resources, dictates energy security. The next great leap will come from dismantling the idea of centralized energy in the form of AI-driven grids that predict demand before it happens. On the other hand, expanding clean cooking gas access requires a multi-fuel strategy, scaling traditional LPG, augmenting bio-CNG, accelerating electrification, and challenging investments into areas such as integration, decentralized renewables like wind power and microgrids to support electric and induction cooking. The challenge is not technology, but scaling access equitably. India has achieved 100% clean cooking access through the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, city gas expansion, and solar cooking pilots, proving that policy-driven solutions can transform lives. The answer to energy transition lies in strategic investments across hydrocarbons and renewables. The future lies in smart capital reallocation, for instance, deploying wind and solar where intermittency is manageable, biofuels where liquid fuel demand persists, and gas where firm power is essential. That is how we assure both affordability and decarbonization. India presents a compelling and diversified investment landscape. 7.6 billion tons of discovered upstream resources, 500 million tons of biofuel foods feedstock, and rising energy demand. At the same time, it is scaling renewables, targeting 5 million metric tons of hydrogen by 2030, $96 billion in hydrogen investments, and a gas share increase from 6 to 15% alongside a $30 billion in refining and petrochemical expansion. Third, resilient supply chains for an orderly transition. Supply disruptions, whether in lithium for storage, nickel for EVs, or semiconductors for AI-driven grids, must not create winners and losers in the transition. Without intervention, the growing gap in energy technology access could leave developing economies locked out of the transition. Governments and industries must act decisively to prevent disorderly shifts. Policy cannot remain while the world accelerates. Governments must craft frameworks that incentivize bold innovation, de-risk essential investment, and ensure commitments beyond the short term. Success will be measured, I submit, not by how fast the wealthiest decarbonize, but how inclusively the world transforms. It is our fervent hope that this third edition of India Energy Week becomes the definitive platform for shaping the energy agenda of the future. This is where transformative partnerships will hopefully take place and take shape, where game-changing technologies are unveiled and the future of energy is written. I urge the 6,000 delegates present here to engage meaningfully in the strategic conference sessions planned for the next 4 days and help chart a roadmap to stabilize energy markets and strengthen international cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Minister, sir, for your address. In fact, it sets the tone in the context of our panel discussion. And ladies and gentlemen, as the Honourable Minister mentioned that we have the global energy order, especially being impacted by shifting geopolitical scenario, evolving trade dynamics, and then the urgency of environmental sustainability. So we now invite the views and the insights from our energy leaders here on the dais with this panel discussion on the topic of shaping a new world energy order and trade map. And I hand over the stage to our moderator, Shri Jagaraja, the senior correspondent, CNBC.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Vimy. And let me start by opening up this panel discussion by thanking Minister Puri for very eloquently enumerating the challenges but also the opportunities that are inherent in the global energy landscape today. And let me start on your first point. We are living in an environment of unfolding uncertainty. From a policy point of view, from a macroeconomic and a market conditions point of view. So that's my first question. How would the panel characterize the balance of macroeconomic and market conditions and risks as they apply to energy pricing? And if I could start with Saad first, please.
First, thank you, Your Excellency, Honorable Minister of Energy, for inviting me to this distinguished panel, and it's great always to be in India. I think on a personal note, Delhi is very special to me. I love coming to Delhi for a specific reason. My father was the first ambassador of Qatar in '74 to India. So Delhi ko bahut pyar karta hai. हिंदी बहुत अच्छा जानता है लेकिन अभी भूल गया पहला बहुत अच्छा जानता है So anyway, I used to speak fluent Hindi. I can dabble with it, but I'm not as fluent as I used to be. But anyway, so first of all, I'd like to thank His Excellency for his excellent speech that I think captured all what I could have said in a much better way than I could have said it. But I think one thing regarding pricing and so it's important to understand that energy poverty exists in the world. You have 1 billion people that does not have basic power that we have. I think you see the example of what the Prime Minister Modi mentioned earlier, and I think I applaud him and his government and the Honourable Minister to the plan that has been put in place by India, and I think it's an example of how you need to balance between the requirement of the nation, ensuring that you can have some renewables, you can have gas that is sustainable, and you need a base load for any country for the intermittence, and you see the methanol, you see all the elements. You need everything, including solar, wind, to cater for the demand that's needed in the future. I think the cancel culture of saying, I don't want this or that, some people were really pushing for it, and I think it depends on where you are and what your environment is. Maybe if you have hydro in abundance, and even that turned out to be not as reliable sometimes. So the intermittency of these energies are a problem. So I think to make sure that we can have affordable fossil fuel, affordable renewable sources, we need to have all these investments in whether it's oil and gas, whether it's renewable, and also in efficiency. And the example of what was done in India, where you have villages that were promised to have electricity, you have 100% villages, as I understand, that are connected by electricity in India, which is a magnificent, undertaking, and to have that, and also the ambition of going to 500 gigawatts by 2030, okay, and having the mix that you have. So I think India is a very good example of what needs to be done in most countries. Every country has its specifics that it has to cater for. But if we don't invest in LNG, for instance, I'll give you an example. LNG today in Europe has spiked up to $15, $16. If you see what Qatar is doing, we are increasing our production of LNG from 77 to 160 million tons globally. To 142 in Qatar, and we have a project in the US that will take it to 160 that will start end of this year, early next year. So this production is going to start next year and incrementally increase in the next few years. If Qatar did not invest in this and take a decision for more than $100 billion of investment about 6 years ago, when people were saying we shouldn't be doing LNG and we should have all green and all renewables, imagine what would happen when you don't have that supply coming on the market. Okay, these spikes that you're seeing going to 16 could go to 25 and 30. So I think we are all supporting it, and this is just an example of LNG.
The core, and I think in the energy mix, above 60% of the energy mix is coming from the coal. But what is it? It is possible in other countries, but it is not possible in Africa. So this something has to be looked at, and we need what we are saying a just transition. We need what we are saying. Let's get something which is workable in a different country. We agree the move has to be there. We need to transition, but how do we do that? It has to be a formula which is created, a clause, and which is really one size fits all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister Saad.
I think enough has been said about that subject. I think I'll just...
All right. Minister Miliband, do you have any final thoughts on the transition? The consensus here is that it is unstoppable, but what is important is to find the right policy framework to
Well, look, I think it's been
that transition.
I think it's been a great session, and I think, my final point, and I think it very much reflects what Minister Puri said, is that there are just huge opportunities to work together across countries. bilaterally, plurilaterally, multilaterally, these challenges that we are facing, and I thought our colleague from Tanzania put it very well when he talked about cooperation across borders in relation to grids and other energy cooperation. These challenges are such that no one country on their own can tackle them. The only way we can tackle them is with partnership, and I think that's very much the spirit of India Energy Week and indeed this conference. So I'm delighted to have been here today.
Thank you very much, Minister Miliband. And that's it for this panel, which has been very engaging, very stimulating. I'll leave you with some final words and final thoughts that really encapsulated the essence of this panel, and that is leveraging hydrocarbons strategically so that renewables can scale is the critical imperative and what we really need to see. So thank you very much indeed for joining us and for listening in, and we will have more stimulating conversations throughout India Energy Week. And thank you to our panellists.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you to our panelists for this very engaging and insightful discussions as we reimagined and rethinking energy security and then our strategic partnerships and the supply chains. And as they mentioned, collaboration is going to be the key towards navigating these transformations. May I request our dignitaries to be kindly taking their seats and requesting you all to remain in the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an important launch which is going to be taking place now. Please be taking your seats. May I request everyone to be there at their respective seats, requesting our dignitaries to be at their seats for there's an important launch happening. May I request the ministers to be seated.